There is a kind of woman the world overlooks until the moment she stops performing for it. She slips from the familiar choreography of flirting, pleasing, proving, and in that quiet withdrawal something ancient begins to breathe again. Perhaps you have met her. Perhaps you are her. She is not bitter. She is not hiding. She is listening. If you've ever suspected that love is larger than romance, that presence is more reliable than applause, stay with this question a little longer. What awakens in a woman when she chooses to live alone? Not as defeat, but as devotion. This is an exploration of that devotion. It is not a rejection of men or of relationship. It is a reordering, a return to the source from which all connection draws. Carl Jung called that source the self, the living center that outlasts every role. When a woman steps back from the stage of constant approval to inhabit her inner center, she is not disappearing. She is deconstructing the mask that once kept her visible. Jung named that mask the persona. She once wore it to be acceptable, safe, desirable. Now she loosens it to be true. The gesture looks like refusal from the outside, but on the inside it feels like reverence. Withdrawal rarely announces itself with trumpets. It starts with small honesty. The conversation that used to thrill now tastes like cardboard. The impulse to impress arrives late, if at all. The smile that fitted every room begins to pinch. She notices she was trained to smile like an apology, to soothe the insecurities of others, to call that diplomacy. She wonders who taught her desire to speak in a whisper. She hears another voice, the voice that is not negotiating but knowing. It does not shout, it does not sell. It simply says, "This is real," and her life begins to rearrange itself around that reality. Jung's map for beginning is individuation, the slow, faithful work of becoming a whole person. Individuation is not an escape from others. It is a homecoming to what we bring to others without debt. For many women, this path asks a period of holy aloneness, because so much of the feminine has been defined in relation. Daughter, girlfriend, wife, mother, caretaker, muse. These roles are beautiful until they become cages. Individuation asks, who are you when the cage door is open and no one is watching? There is a season in this journey that feels like midnight. Alchemists called it nigredo, the blackening, when the old self dissolves and the truth refuses bright paint. It is not glamour. It is not marketable. It is lonely in the honest way pilgrimage is lonely. She meets the mother complex that trained her to measure worth by service and sacrifice. She meets the Animus, the inner masculine she once projected onto men to carry her courage, her clarity, her command. She meets the shadow, where she stored inconvenient brilliance, anger, hunger, authority, tenderness. She meets fear, and beneath it she meets freedom. She begins to place it. Her home becomes a temenos, a sacred precinct where she practices the art of inner climate. She learns the weather of her feelings and the seasons of her energy. Morning coffee is no longer a chemical push. It is a quiet sacrament. Evening silence is not emptiness. It is the sounding board where intuition rings true. Instead of asking, who will love me? She wonders, how shall I love what is mine to love? Her answer changes the texture of her days. She stops bargaining for affection and starts cultivating attention. Attention is what love looks like from the inside. Jung taught the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites until a living third appears. This woman learns that function in her bones. She is independent and available, receptive and decisive, soft and strong. The culture prefers neat extremes, but paradox is the womb of wisdom. She refuses to collapse into cynicism and refuses, too, the glitter of dependency. When she says no, it is not a rebellion. It is a reverence for the yes that will matter. When she says yes, it is not a performance. It is a promise. Something else happens when the hunger quiets. Love changes form. Love is no longer a currency to trade or a contract to enforce. It becomes a current that moves through her. She stops chasing experiences to patch an ache and starts tending practices that open a well. She learns to regulate her own nervous system, to feel a feeling all the way through without outsourcing the responsibility to someone else's body. From that regulation grows availability. The connection she offers carries no hook of need. It is clean. It is generous. It is steady enough to hold another person without swallowing them. You might think solitude shrinks the world, but the opposite often occurs. With less noise, pattern appears. Jung called the meeting between inner and outer order synchronicity. She begins to notice how the right book finds her hands when she holds a question sincerely. A path opens in the park exactly when she is ready to walk it. She laughs, not because life now obeys her, but because life finally speaks a language she can hear. Creativity rises through the same channel. She paints, writes, sings, gardens, studies, experiments. Not to be seen, but to see. Not to produce, but to participate. Of course, the world has opinions about a woman who does not organize herself around its needs. Some admire her freedom. Some misread it as a wound. Some call her intimidating. Some try to explain her to herself. She does not fight their mirrors. She practices an older discipline, right distance. From right distance, compassion returns. She knows most people are only repeating what they were taught about where female power belongs. She also knows her life is a koan, a paradox that cannot be solved with gossip, and she protects its mystery with dignity. Wisdom traditions have long honored this posture. Hermits withdrew to the desert. Saints tended small cells, poets sought bare rooms, philosophers kept a clearing in the woods. The point was never isolation for its own sake. The point was fidelity to what speaks only in quiet. In modern life, quiet must often be chosen against the friction of expectation. That is why this path takes courage. It is easier to be half of something than whole unto yourself, easier to defer to a script than write one, easier to soothe a room than to become a room where truth can breathe. Presence changes a house into a monastery without stone. She curates rituals not because ritual is chic, but because repetition sanctifies attention. She cooks as if flavor is a theology. She sweeps as if clarity begins on the floor. She reads because wisdom is a lineage she can join. She writes because memory asks for a steward. She tends the body like an altar. Breath, rest, sweat, water, light. These are not hobbies. They are sacraments that remind her she is already accompanied by the life that animates everything. People often ask the wrong question. Does she still believe in love? That question assumes love is elsewhere. She learned to begin inside. Beginning inside does not cancel romance. It clarifies it. She no longer projects the animus onto a partner and then resents him for being human. She integrates focus, will, and discernment as her own capacities. If a relationship arrives, it meets her at the level of reality she now inhabits. Partnership becomes two centers cooperating rather than two half-selves bargaining. Intimacy becomes the meeting of truth-tellers instead of a therapy for loneliness. Responsibility grows into generosity. Because she is not starving, she can feed. Her love becomes gift rather than transaction. She listens without trying to fix. She speaks without trying to perform. She keeps confidences because her solitude has taught her the weight of words. Friends recognize that her presence recalibrates a room. Strangers sometimes sense a steadiness they cannot name. This is what happens when a person is aligned. The field around them becomes permissive for truth. Not dramatic truth, dependable truth. Memory awakens another recognition. Women like this are not new. Before industrial clocks, before domestic contracts hardened into destiny, there were figures who held the village lineages of insight. Midwives, healers, oracles, scribes, keepers of seasonal rites. Many belonged to households, many did not. What united them was not marital status, but interior sovereignty. The modern woman who chooses sacred solitude joins that lineage, updates it, and smuggles it through airports and meetings and grocery aisles. She belongs to the ancient future. Re-enchantment begins with disciplined imagination. Jung called one method active imagination, entering a dialogue with images and symbols that rise from the unconscious. She gives them room. She keeps a dream journal by the bed. She lets a fragment of myth rearrange a week. She sketches the mood she cannot yet say. She notices how an inner figure shifts from judge to mentor as she listens respectfully. In that listening, she becomes a translator, carrying messages from the unseen to the practical. The translation is not abstract. It sounds like kindness and reads like clarity. What does society gain from such women? A redefinition of power. The prevailing model treats power as domination or display. She practices power as attunement, the ability to do only what accords with reality and nothing that violates it. That power is non-competitive by nature. It does not need to be against anything to be itself. Yet it is not passive. It is fiercely protective of what is tender and true. It has boundaries like rivers have banks. It says to the frantic world, there is enough. It says to the frightened heart, you are enough. The culture calls this selfish. She calls it stewardship. She remembers how destructive she was when she tried to care for everyone from a deficit. She remembers the resentment that follows obligatory kindness. She recognizes that unchosen generosity often hides the wish to be chosen. Her solitude cuts that knot. She gives because she means it, and she says no because she means it. Over time, reliability accumulates around her choices. People learn they can lean without collapsing her, ask without coercing her, trust without owning her. Notice how many curiosities still live inside this life. How does she grieve alone? She grieves by trusting emotion to complete its arc without making a spectacle of pain. How does she celebrate? She celebrates by honoring the rhythm that gave rise to joy, knowing joy is a teacher, as stern as sorrow. How does she stay hopeful? She does not confuse hope with prediction. Hope is fidelity to purposes that outlive mood. She holds that fidelity the way a gardener holds a seed, without proof except for the history of harvest. The hands remember. They remember turning off the notifications and hearing birds again. They remember cooking a simple meal and feeling like an ancestor. They remember leaving a table early because every conversation at it was a transaction, and choosing instead to walk where clouds were doing theater. They remember crying on the kitchen floor and discovering the floor held. They remember saying no to a good enough possibility because the body whispered, "Not this," and later discovering a path that felt like yes. There is also the question of authority. Whose voice counts? For a long time, the loudest voices defined womanhood as service to someone else's story. This woman decides to be the author of her own meaning. Author and authority share a root. She writes a life that reads like itself. She will be misunderstood. She will be accused of arrogance, coldness, unrealistic standards, or secret need. She has space for misunderstanding because she did not choose this path to be understood. She chose it to be true. She accepts the cost and refuses the discount. You might be wondering, where does all of this lead? Not to a conclusion, but to a conduct. Conduct becomes character glazed with time. She keeps faith with the practices that keep faith with her. Meditation or prayer, work well done, friendships tended with care, study that deepens competence, art that roughens and refines the soul, pleasure taken without apology, rest granted without guilt. She orients herself to cycles, the seasons of the year, the phases of the moon, the rise and fall of energy, and makes decisions that honor those tides. The result is coherence. Enough does not mean small, it means sufficiency aligned with purpose. From enough, she can become generous with knowledge. She mentors without colonizing. She teaches by embodiment more than advice. People learn around her that life is not a contest, and worth is not a commodity. They learn that boundaries are beautiful, because they create shape. They learn that silence is not absence. It is the chamber where words earn their meaning. If they ask what she is doing with her life, she says, "I am making coherence," and her calendar begins to agree. This coherence radiates outward in ordinary ways. In a meeting, she names the question underneath the question. In a disagreement, she distinguishes feelings from facts and neither discards feelings nor worships them. In a crisis, she slows the pace until the next wise step appears. In joy, she notices the impulse to clutch and instead practices appreciation that does not cling. She is not perfect. She is practiced. That difference is everything. Practice is how a life becomes dependable enough to carry other lives without collapsing. Jung sometimes described the self as a mandala, a patterned wholeness that can be sensed before it is seen. She lives closer to that pattern now. Some days it looks like solitude by a window. Some days it looks like community formed around sincerity. Some days it looks like leaving a place that will not honor the pattern and walking toward a place that will. She is less interested in proving and more in consenting to what is proportionate to her soul. Consent is the new courage. Return then to the beginning. The world overlooks this woman until she stops performing and then wonders how she learned to glow without a spotlight. The answer is not a secret. It is attention, discipline, imagination, and the courage to be unmarketable while the soul is changing shape. It is the recognition that aloneness and loneliness are not the same species, and that a person can be crowded and still feel desolate, or be solitary and feel companioned by everything. It is the slow burn of becoming trustworthy to yourself. Trustworthy women alter the collective field. Without slogans, they preserve practices nearly lost. Contemplation, self-respect, fidelity to interior law, friendship as covenant, pleasure without punishment, play without audience, study without vanity, work without worship, rest without shame. Their example drains drama from the culture's addiction to urgency. Their choices whisper to daughters and sons that there is a different way to be powerful. Their solitude becomes a public service because it anchors a possibility everyone can sense, but few believe is allowed. If you recognize yourself here, consider this an affirmation, not a diagnosis. You are not behind. You are not strange. You are a frontier. Keep going. Let the roles you no longer inhabit fall away without ceremony. Let what is genuine keep you company. Say no when your bones say no, and yes when your joy says yes. Learn to trust how truth feels in the body. Remember that the sacred feminine is not a trend, but an inheritance, and that integrity is how you claim it. If you recognize someone you love, trust her pace. Do not try to fix what is not broken. Do not diminish what you do not yet understand. Ask better questions. What nourishes you? What hurts? What do you no longer negotiate? Where does it still hurt to tell the truth? Listen to her answers the way you would guard a candle in wind. Do not call her selfish for attending to the flame that will light your way too. In the end, the spiritual meaning of women who live alone without a man is not about absence at all. It is about presence, the restoration of feminine wholeness to its own authority, its own rhythm, its own communion with the divine. It is about a human being choosing to be complete and then offering the world the surplus of that completeness. This choice is not loud, but it resounds. It travels through families like a clarifying bell. It travels through workplaces like an unhurried competence. It travels through communities like a medicine that asks for nothing and heals what it touches. So let the world think what it will. Let the expectations keep their anxious calendar. A woman can step beyond the stage without stepping away from love. She can build a life that is not a performance but a prayer. She can become, in the old word, a hierophant, a revealer of the sacred, not by preaching but by living. When she does, the rest of us remember something we forgot to ask for, a life that makes sense from the inside. And remembering, we begin again, this time from the center that never needed permission. Consider another polarity that matures inside her: Logos and Eros. Logos is structure, clarity, word. Eros is connection, warmth, bond. When she lived to be pleasing, her Eros bent into appeasement, and her Logos narrowed into justifications. In Solitude, both are rehabilitated. Logos returns as clear thought and honest speech, a schedule that fits soul instead of status. Eros returns as generous attention that does not dissolve into others. She learns a rarer grammar in which love speaks through boundaries. The old alchemist said nigredo is followed by albedo, a whitening when something essential is washed clean. Many women describe a season like that. Long walks, unadorned meals, tears without spectacle, pages that finally tell the truth. Then citrinitas, the yellowing when insight warms into embodied knowing. She starts to feel timing in her bones. Finally rubedo, the reddening, when life heats into form, projects ripen, friendships deepen, devotion takes shape. There is also the matter of work and money. Solitude is not a vacation from responsibility. It is a re-evaluation of value. She chooses work that suits her temperament where possible, and negotiates wisely where it does not. She stops confusing busyness with worth. She learns that frugality can be freedom when it funds the right kind of wealth. Time to think, energy to create, bandwidth to care. Craft becomes a spirituality of its own. Ethics shifts as well. When she was young, goodness meant compliance. As she matures, goodness becomes coherence. She apologizes without self-erasure and forgives without self-betrayal. She learns the difference between secrecy and privacy, mystery and manipulation. Freedom becomes specificity. Freedom to do what serves the soul, not freedom from every bond. Paradoxically, that specificity opens more life than permission grants. Sometimes the body tells the story first. Sleep returns, the jaw unclenches, the shoulders lower from their invisible shrug. Hunger feels trustworthy again. Pleasure stops asking for permission. She faces the mirror without bargaining. She thanks the parts that kept her alive when approval was rationed and invites them to rest. A person no longer at war with her own body becomes harder to market and easier to love. Myth keeps her company as a language of deep time. She finds kinship with figures who held their ground without apology. Artemis walking the woods, Hestia keeping the sacred hearth, Demeter searching the dark until love returned. She does not copy them. She lets them remind her that every era has required women who could hold a center. If you are listening for permission, consider this question. What do you already know that your life refuses to forget? Perhaps it is small and constant, the way relief floods you when you cancel a performance you never wanted to give. Perhaps it is large and sudden, the recognition that you would rather be honest and alone than adored for a mask. Knowledge like this is covenantal. When you keep it, it keeps you. One more truth. Her solitude is not superior to other paths. It is simply hers. Some women find their wholeness inside marriage and motherhood. Some inside vowed communities. Some on the road as artists. The point is not the setting. The point is the sovereignty with which life is lived. She blesses other choices, because difference is not a threat to a person who belongs to herself. That blessing multiplies quietly.